everyone. Good afternoon. Can you see me? Can you hear me? All right. Lots of yeses here. Yes, I was going to ask you, where are you from? I'm curious. Piracicaba, São Paulo. Isabel is from Petrópolis, nice. Recife, London, cool. Brasília. Oh, we have another Lygia in the room. A Lygia with a Y. Great. São Bento do Sul, Manaus. Great. We have people from all corners of Brazil here. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Let me introduce myself very quickly. My name is Lygia. I've been working in ELT for about 10 years now. And today I work as an academic consultant at Troika, which you may have heard of. We're a consulting company which specializes in lots of services related to education. And today, as you know, we're talking about some pronunciation myths. I'm quite excited. And throughout the webinar, I'll be doing most of the talking, but you'll also be, hello, Patricia. You'll also be invited to participate at times, and please do, because your participation is very important. I'll try to keep up with the messages in the chat box, but in case I miss any of them, let me tell you my email so that you can get in touch with me and ask me about any questions which I may have missed. If you want to get the slides that I'm going to use, I can also send them to you by email, so just drop me a line. And one more thing, if you have any questions about the certificate, you can send an email to this address over here. Let me share it with you as well. So eventos@disal.com.br. So if you have any questions about the certificate, any problems, just send an email to this address over here, all right? And what else? As for the structure of the webinar, it's very straightforward, very simple. There's a bit of an introduction first. We're going to discuss our aims when we teach pronunciation. Then we'll move on and talk about each myth. There are 5 total. And finally, I think we'll also have some time for a Q&A at the end, okay? So let's get started. Over there's a sentence for you to complete. So when I teach pronunciation, I want my students to. So think about this sentence for a minute, and when you're ready, tell me in the chat box how you would complete it. What do you want your students to do when you teach pronunciation, all right? And I'll take a look at your answers here. We already have one by Wallace. Be intelligible. Luciana is saying, understand the melody of the English language. Send a clear message. Imitate the model. Make them be understood. Confidence. Repeat what I say. Some of you are saying similar things. Others are mentioning how students should feel when they pronounce different words in English, make themselves understandable, try to be smart, to be as fluent as a native, secure to communicate. Okay, interesting. We've had some responses here. Thank you very much. If you haven't typed your answer yet, you can still do it. But let me show you what I have in mind when I teach pronunciation. So when I teach pronunciation, I want my students to achieve comfortable intelligibility. This is a concept which was first introduced by Kenworthy in 1987, as you can see over there. And what does it encompass? Well, the idea of comfortable intelligibility involves students being able to understand others without having to ask the other person to repeat what they said many times so that they get the message. It also has to do with learners being understood easily, something that some of you have mentioned, without having to repeat the same information over and over again or rephrase what they said in different ways so that their message finally gets across. This type of experience may be very frustrating, right? And depending on the interlocutor, they might even think, well, I don't want to speak to this person again. It's just too difficult to understand what he or she means. And I think we can all agree that this is something we'd never want anyone to think about a student of ours, right? And one more thing is that the idea of comfortable intelligibility allows us to set different goals according to the skill we have in mind. So when we think about speaking, for our learners to be intelligible, they don't need to produce all features of connected speech, which may be common, or be able to speak very fast in English. But on the other hand, when it comes to their listening skills, they could be more ambitious, understanding a TV show without subtitles, with lots of informal speech, sound simplifications, etc. This is a reasonable target regarding their listening, but they don't need to speak like the American actors, for example, in the show. Close enough would be fine. But of course, if they want to be more ambitious regarding their speaking skills as well, that's okay. What they need to understand is that it's not necessary to speak like a native user of the language for them to be understood. Okay? So, having said that, let me ask you to take a look at this word cloud over there. And by looking at these words, let's see if you can guess which myths we're going to cover today, okay? You can think a little bit at first. You can also try to remember some myths you've already heard or read about. And let's see if you can guess some of the myths we're going to address today, all right? I'll give you a moment and I'll be looking at the chat box here. It's not impossible, Luciana. I've given you keywords which are going to feature in each of the myths. Accent reduction, interesting, Melissa. But each myth is a sentence which describes a belief that either teachers or students have. Sometimes both teachers and students have this belief regarding the pronunciation of English. So let's see if you can guess these sentences, these myths. Okay, prejudice for not speaking as a native. There is an ideal accent, okay. Repetition, accent. You have to speak like a native. This is something that we've already addressed, right, Isabel? Get rid of the accent. Some students believe they need to speak like a native. Ideal linguicism. British English is the standard. Okay, you're getting close, Isabel. Being perfect. All right. I think you've used almost all the words. There is an ideal pronunciation standard to follow. Interesting, Vera. Perfect grammar in order to sound like a native. I agree, Marina. This is something that a lot of students do, a lot of teachers do as well. All right. Well, to respect a variety of English. All right. Well, let me show you our first myth. And some of you have hit the nail on the head. So there you go. So the first myth I have is American and British English are the only correct varieties of English. This is something that has been debunked since the 80s at least, but it's still regarded as true by many students and teachers as well. The first thing that's problematic when we look at this sentence here is that, first of all, we have to be very careful when we talk about American English or British English that way. As you know, there is more than one variety of American English. There are several varieties of British English as well. So if we always discuss the differences between American and British English with our students without raising awareness first of the varieties within each one, or of the fact that there are varieties within each one, well, this can be very misleading to our students from the outset. So when students say, I want to speak like an American, well, you can ask, what kind of American? A person from New York, Boston, from a southern city? What do you have in mind? And what's paramount here is that English now, as you know, is a lingua franca, something that some of you have touched on as well. So it's used by non-native speakers all over the world in business contexts, academic contexts, what have you. So it is a global language. It doesn't belong to native speakers. And there is no ideal accent we should all aspire to. And also, a consequence of English becoming a lingua franca is that it has changed a lot. It's still changing, and this process won't stop. Many phonological features, which are or were considered incorrect, are now quite common in the context of English as a lingua franca, in the context of ELF. And they don't necessarily lead to speakers being considered unintelligible. Now you can ask me, what does that mean in terms of correcting students' mistakes? Should we stop correcting them altogether because other non-native speakers will probably understand them if they make some pronunciation mistakes? Of course not. What I recommend is raising awareness of the fact that, yes, if I say think and not think, something that, mind you, even some Londoners do in a conversation with Indian people, for example, they'll probably understand me, and this won't be considered a mistake. They probably won't even notice that. But if I'm delivering a presentation at work to native speakers, this might cause a negative impression when it comes to my English. It might affect my credibility as a speaker of the language in this specific context. So students should be aware that the mistakes we make may provoke different reactions according to the context. So knowing what's considered correct can still be very useful. Overall, though, I'd say that it's our job here to fight linguistic prejudice or linguicism in our classrooms, especially nowadays when it goes hand in hand with other types of prejudice as well, right? So, having said all of this, I want to know, have you ever had to deal with this type of conversation in the classroom, or have you ever felt linguistic prejudice while speaking English or a variety of your mother tongue? Many times, Wallace. Have you addressed this issue in the classroom many times, or have you felt linguistic prejudice more than once? Any examples that come to mind? Students fear British English. Wow, that's a strong word. They fear British English. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Yes, Luciana, that's so sad. The vira-lata complex, that's true. Asking what it is that we teach. Yes. Is it American or is it British English? Very common question still nowadays. Okay. Your students travel a lot, Solange. So Melissa is saying here, I was privileged to live in Canada where multiculturalism is expected, but it was challenging being a Brazilian in an English-speaking country. I bet. I bet, Melissa, and I'm sorry that you've had this experience. You know, they don't want to sound like a Brazilian. I agree, Luciana. Okay. So Rosemary, students think that British English is better. Okay, interesting. English is an international language. This is it. Oh, yes, Isabel, I also agree. Native teachers are better than Brazilian teachers when we know that being a non-native speaker actually gives us lots of advantages in the classroom. We can help students with questions involving translation, for example, or similarities between Portuguese and English, which might come in handy. Oh, that's terrible, Thiago. Thiago is saying here, I had a teacher who had a Mexican accent while speaking English, and he got fired because students complained bitterly about the way he talked. Yes, that's just terrible because our accent is part of who we are. It's part of our identity, right? So we're not actually delving into the issue of well, should students speak like native speakers? Some of them do. Should we say no? Well, that's a bit complicated, right? But I think that it's something that we should be careful with because there's no native norm that we should all adhere to. It just isn't necessary. And when we try to get rid of our accent, are we also trying to get rid of our identity as well, as individuals, as members of a certain social class? So it's quite delicate. So thank you very much for all your contributions here. You can keep on typing as well, but let's let's move on and let's talk about the second myth. But before we do so, I'd like you to think about a second point right now. I'd like you to think about a specific variety of English or some varieties of English that you consider difficult to understand. And also, I'd like you to think about why that is. Why do you consider some accents, for example, or a particular accent difficult to understand. Why is that the case? Tell me what you think in the chat box here, everybody. Indian, okay, that's something very common, right? Indian people speaking English. So that is saying that the vowels are pronounced differently. Okay. American English, North American English, because of Hollywood and the entertainment industry. Interesting, Melissa. Because of accent and pronunciation. Welsh. Okay, you've mentioned some varieties here, but there are very few reasons as to why you consider them difficult. Any thoughts on the reasons behind that? Okay, so let's just say they speak funny. But why? Why do they speak funny in some parts of London? Lack of familiarity. Okay, the vowel sounds are tricky in Australian English. This is Vera saying here. The lack of exposure. Melissa mentioned connected speech. Okay, nice. So some of you have already anticipated what we're going to talk about right now. Let me show you the second myth. There you go. So I think that Wallace mentioned this before. I think so. But this is something that I often hear, especially by students, that British English is more difficult to understand. And well, some of you have mentioned that in the chat box. When we talk about one variety being more difficult than another, what we should bear in mind is exactly what some of you have pointed out. There is nothing inherently difficult about each variety of British English, Australian English, Canadian English, etc. What happens is that we are more familiar with certain varieties than others. And yes, Melissa said something along these lines. When it comes to the entertainment industry, I think it's no surprise that general American English has been the variety with which people have had the most contact with for quite some time, right? It's always been everywhere in songs, in movies, TV shows, etc. So it becomes easier to understand some varieties of American English if you always have contact with those varieties. This was even true for me when I studied English in the past. I thought that the British English spoken by the cast in the Harry Potter movies was so hard because they didn't pronounce the sound. They pronounced some words differently from what I was used to. They said schedule instead of schedule, or dictionary instead of dictionary. But now, when I look back on it, I see that what happened is that I simply wasn't used to hearing people speak that way. And something else which we know intuitively perhaps, but has also been proven by research as well, is that if you're friends with a foreigner, it'll probably be easier for you to understand this person than a stranger with the same accent. So if you speak to a Scottish person for the first time, this person may sound less intelligible than a friend of yours with the same accent. And of course, what follows from this discussion is that we should expose our students to as many accents as possible in the classroom. Because if they're only used to hearing people from the USA or people from the UK, they'll probably struggle a lot when they interact with someone from China for the first time. And if you're using a course book which doesn't have any recordings with non-native speakers, well, you can always find some videos on YouTube. You can use snippets from movies, from TV shows, so that your learners are better prepared to deal with these interactions, which they'll probably have outside the classroom, right? Does everything make sense so far? So far, so good. Any questions? Would you like to comment on anything so far? Let me drink some water as well. Oh, that's great, Solange. There's so many videos available online, right? That's great. Okay, Thiago, let me see what you're saying here. Yes, definitely. So many regional accents here in Brazil, right? Instead, they say, okay, definitely. Mm-hmm. Very interesting, Thiago. This is something that should be taken into account as well. That accents which are considered prestige accents, they tend to be the norm, right? I mean, of course, there's the fact that RP received pronunciation. It is the variety which has been described in several sources and which can be more easily studied by teachers, by students, but of course that the social status of the people that use a specific variety has to be taken into account. And something something which comes to mind as well is this. We know that when we're talking about intelligibility, we're talking about speakers and listeners. But it's not enough for students to articulate all sounds clearly and precisely for them to be intelligible. If the interlocutor doesn't have much familiarity with your accent, and if the interlocutor isn't willing to accept what you're saying, and if the interlocutor considers your accent low prestige, you may sound less intelligible to this person, which is crazy, right? But it's something that we have to bear in mind as well. So Luciane is also saying here, General English School in London, seem not to like my Brazilian American accent. Well, I guess this relates to what I was saying before, to what Thiago said, that the interlocutor's attitude has to be taken into account as well when we want to talk to students about intelligibility, right? Okay, everybody. So thank you so much for your contributions again. Let's move on right now. Let me show you the third myth. Check it out. So there you go. Teaching pronunciation is all about repetition. Well, let's think about this sentence for a moment. What do you think the problem is here? What is the problem if I rely exclusively on repetition when I teach pronunciation to my students? Why is this a myth? Why should it be debunked? Any thoughts? Any guesses? All about. Okay, yes, Wallace, you're close. Pronunciation is about practicing. Interesting. All about, Patricia is saying as well. Though repetition oftentimes equals fossilized mistakes. Nice. Okay, Vera, you're questioning the idea of repetition without any kind of feedback. Good point. Parrot-like, not learning the language. Okay, cool. So, well, The problem here is that, well, repetition, it's just not enough. And it's not the most important thing when we're teaching pronunciation. Actually, raising awareness of how we use our vocal apparatus to produce sounds in English is actually key when it comes to changing the way, when it comes to changing the way our students speak. Now you can say, well, great, but how can we do that? Well, let me try and give you an example. This is something that I've learned from Adrian Underhill. He's done it in more than one video available online. I've tried it with my students and I find it very effective. So over there you can see a part of the phonemic chart. We have 3 symbols and I'd like you to do this with me, okay, at home. Please follow my example. So first, I'd like you to produce the first sound, which is represented here by the first symbol on the left, just like this. So if we were to produce it, we would say, so do it as well over there at your homes. And you can probably notice that our tongues aren't doing much when we're producing this sound, right? It's just lying there. But right now, I'd like you to slowly move your tongues forward so that the tip of your tongue almost touches your top teeth. So again, I'm going to start with the sound, and now I'm going to slowly move my tongue forward. So by doing this, you'll see that you're pronouncing the TH sound, as in 3, which is represented by the third symbol here on the right. So I'm not showing students the written form of 3 and asking them to repeat 3, 3, 3 several times in a row. I'm actually raising awareness of how they should move their tongues so that they can produce this sound. So later on, if you haven't done this before with your students, give it a try, because I think this will be much more effective than just asking them to repeat this sound over and over again when oftentimes they can't even hear the specific sound that you have in mind. Okay? Well, let's talk a little bit more about the chart right now. And once again, I'd like you to help me. This next myth, well, it has to do with how the phonemic chart should be used. If it should be used with all learners, or if we should avoid using it with specific types of learners. Can you guess what the next myth is? I've given you some hints, so it shouldn't be so hard to guess it. Great, Thiago. So again, some people believe that the phonemic chart should be used with specific types of learners, and that's a myth. Ah, okay. Rosemary's saying not to use with kids. All right, maybe. We'll see that in a moment. Any other guesses? Any other suggestions? Not really? Guess you're not so sure about this one, right? Neither ignore nor memorize it. People with speech patterns. Well, let's see, we have some more answers here. Following your students' learning strategies. Okay, Vera. Then already speak English. Okay, well, let me show it to you. Myth 4. So the phonemic chart isn't suitable for elementary learners. Well, this is something that I've heard from many teachers, and it is a belief that is still held by lots of teachers, actually. Now, what they usually say is that the phonemic chart isn't suitable for elementary learners because, well, it's just too difficult and it'll cause lots of problems in the classroom. Now, this is just not true. If I want to teach my students how to pronounce the word lunch, for example, um, it's much easier to do so if I show them the phonemic transcription on the right. Just by looking at certain symbols, such as the sound and the t sound, students are much more likely to get it right than if I just show them the written form of the word lunch and ask them to repeat it several times in a row. It's much easier. Now, something we have to be careful with, though, is the fact that simply showing them the phonemic transcription is not enough. We need to help them with the individual sounds that each symbol represents. Do we need to teach all of them in a single lesson? No. You can do this little by little, teach different symbols in different lessons so that they can feel more and more confident about the chart. But if I were to help my students with the pronunciation of lunch and I show them the phonemic transcription, I would actually point to the last symbol here and ask them to repeat. So everybody, shh, repeat after me, shh. So this is the symbol that represents this sound, shh. And then maybe ask them to repeat the t sound as well, because this is something they often struggle with. So everybody, ch, ch. Can you see the two symbols here? So ch, t, the t sound is the same as the letter. So now lunch. So there we go. I'm helping them with the individual sounds in the word lunch and also teaching them 1, 2 symbols here. It's as simple as that. By doing this, we're helping our learners produce different sounds in English and also making them more autonomous as well. When they're studying by themselves, they'll be able to look up a word in a dictionary and understand how it's pronounced without having to hear anyone say it, which, as we've seen, may not be enough for them to get it right. Let me see some of your messages here in the chat box. And by the way, it's getting a bit darker over here. So I'm going to turn on the lights here. So, all right, Tiago has asked a question here. How do you feel about emulating sounds by making associations with Portuguese? I think it's great. I think that's an excellent idea. Why not use sounds that students already know in Portuguese to their advantage? So, oh guys, this sound here, shh, is just like the sound we have in the word chamar in Portuguese, right? So chamar, it's the same sound that we have at the end of lunch, lunch. So I think that Portuguese can be an asset in the classroom in this sense, and students will probably find it very profitable. So, oh, it's something that I already produce, so there's no big deal here. Lygia, beautiful name, saying here it's suitable, definitely suitable for elementary learners. We have to make it relevant as they produce the right sounds, inserted according to their needs, of course. Just using it not as the main point, but as a helping tool. Definitely. I couldn't agree more, Lygia. We have to consider their needs, and we're not just using it for the sake of it. It has to be relevant, right? Uh, let's see. Sometimes I write the word like it would be in Portuguese, you know? Well, I think this is I think this is valid. I think that this is something we can do. We just have to be careful so that it doesn't affect their spelling, right? So that in the future, when they write that word, they don't remember uh, this alternative that they saw, for example, in the classroom. So this is something that would have to be pointed out. So I think it's possible, but I'd say that we should do it carefully. Let's put it this way. Oh, yes, Luciana. Saw sounds like do, vo. That's right. Okay, very good. So, all right, we're reaching the end right now. Let me show you the fifth myth. There you go. This is something that students usually complain about. I don't know if you agree, but I've heard it many times. Oh, they just speak too fast, Lygia, and I can't get what they're saying. Now, the problem here, yes, right, Wallace. The problem here is that speed of speech doesn't really affect intelligibility that much. So when students say this, they're actually showing us that they're struggling with something else when they hear people speaking English. Can you guess what that might be? I think we already have some answers here. Melissa is saying connected speech. Sometimes my students complain I speak too fast. Oh, yeah, I know. You have to say, no, I'm speaking naturally, right? If I speak too slowly, well, I'm not helping you because this is not how people will speak to you outside the classroom, right? Connected speech, this is Vera's suggestion as well. We have lazy ears. We're used to speakers who speak word for word. I don't know about that, Thiago. I know that what I can say is that elementary learners, and this is something we often tell them, right? If the person is speaking too fast, ask them to slow down a little bit. But this is not what we want them to do whenever they're interacting with someone outside the classroom, right? We want them to be able to understand the other person without having to say, well, could you please slow down? Listening, are they thinking in Portuguese? Let's see, Solange. Choppy utterances. Linking words, they speak faster indeed for journalists, for instance. This is possible, Rosemary. Yes, I do think that this happens sometimes. But as I said, it's been research and it's been proven by research that speed of speech doesn't affect intelligibility that much. So actually, when students complain about this, and some of you have already mentioned it, yes, they're probably struggling with connected speech. They're probably struggling to tell when a word ends and when another word begins in English. They're probably struggling with these sounds at word boundaries. Why might this be a problem in English? Well, as you probably know, we often delete sounds, we connect sounds, and we also produce different sounds at word junctions in the stream of speech. We do all of that because the system of simplifications, which is connected speech, makes our jobs easier when we're producing phrases and sentences. But if we're not aware of features of connected speech or connected speech phenomena, we might hear someone and think they're saying one word instead of two. So for this reason, working on connected speech is paramount in the classroom. How can we do that? Well, here I have an activity which comes from the book by Bowen and Marks. I'll show you the name of the book in a moment. And how does this activity work? It's very simple. To start with, you could provide students with a handout with the 2 columns, or something which I prefer, you could dictate the words in the first column and the phrases or sentences in the second column, because this will give you the opportunity to integrate different skills. So they're practicing their listening skills, their writing. We can even put some speaking in the mix as well. So a dictation allows us to do all of that. But in any case, once students have the handout, or once students have all the words and all the phrases and sentences from both columns in their notebooks. What they have to do, and this is something they can do in pairs, in trios, in small groups, it's up to you. They have to identify the sounds which are produced in the second column, in column B, and which are also present in column A. So for example, in column B, we have number 2 here, an ice cream. And sorry, we can see that there's a connection here between the final consonant sound in N and the initial vowel sound in ice. So we have in nice, nice. Yes, Luciana, nice exercise. So this sound here, nice, is the same sound that we have in number 5 from column A, right? Nice. So there you go. This is one match. Nice in number 5 and number 2 in ice cream. So this is what they would have to do with the other words and phrases and sentences here. Just find the other matches. By doing this activity, we're helping students with catenation, right? Which is this connection between final consonant sounds and initial vowel sounds. So they'll see that we're producing these different sounds when we connect different words when speaking in English. Is this exercise considering British English pronunciation? Yes, for example, the first one here, Melissa, right? The first one here, what I would say is nothing at all. So this sound here, at all, is not actually in the first column. So if I'm from London, for example, I would say nothing at all. Toll. And this sound, toll, is the same sound as in tall, right? Or toll in number 8 from column A. All right. So it's taken into account in this exercise. But as far as I can remember, the other examples here are applicable to certain varieties of American English and British English as well. Okay? So, all right. I guess this is pretty much all I wanted to cover when it comes to the 5 myths. We still have some time. So tell me, are there any questions that you'd like to ask me? Any final comments? Anything you want to get off your chest? I'm all ears right now. Let me see here. Tiago is saying students are too attached to the myth. We should understand everything everybody says all the time. I agree. They miss a word, they obsess over it, they start to overthink. Kicks in and their affective filter blocks everything. They can't get out of their heads. Yes, I agree, Thiago, especially elementary learners, right? Whenever we're doing listening exercises with basic or elementary learners, we have to be careful with that. So, something that I usually do is before playing the recording for the first time, I address what you have mentioned. So, everyone, and of course, depending on the level, this is something that we should do in Portuguese. Because if we do it in English, they just won't understand anything we're saying. So, is this. Oh, sorry, guys, I was taking a look at the other messages here and I forgot what I was saying. But anyway, so we can even say in Portuguese. A gente precisa entender tudo que a gente ouvir agora? No, it's not necessary to understand everything we hear. Então, o que que eu posso fazer se eu não entender tudo que eu entender? Alright, so maybe the other words can give me a hint as to what they're saying. And, I will continue paying attention to everything else they're saying and I won't get stuck. So I think this is a very useful strategy that we should mention to our elementary students before they listen to a recording for the first time so that we can lower their affective filters and they're actually able to relax a little bit and try and process what they hear. So very good point, Tiago. Let me see the other messages. I think I've missed many here. Number 10, column B. Could you tell us the source? I'll show you the source in a moment, Natalia. I'll show you the book in a moment, Jessica. Let's see, we should call attention for a specific variety first. No, not necessarily, Rosemary. I think we could mention, okay, so in number 1 here, it's possible to pronounce it in different ways. I could say nothing at all or nothing at all, for example. But where can I find this sound here? Tall or tall. In number 8 from column A. You see? So I think this is something we can address while correcting the exercise. Good sources on that topic. What do you mean, Natalia? Sources related to pronunciation activities, because I have one for you. I'll show it to you in a moment. Sentences and sounds like this exercise according to the level of the student. I think the source I'll show to you in a moment will be very useful, Lygia. Luciana, that's great. You've seen me before. That's great. Oh, that's excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much. Taking notes and translating. That's all right, Daniele. All right, so let me show you the sources. All right, here we go. So the first one is, well, as the name suggests, proposals for a practical pedagogy. This is the one with lots of practical activities regarding pronunciation. This is where the last activity I showed comes from. And the activities are also divided according to our focus. So I want to help my students with intonation. So there's a list of activities that we can do. I want to help my students with stress or individual sounds, rhythm. So lots and lots of activities. And I'd say that most of them require no or very little preparation as the one I've shown you. So I strongly recommend it, and I think you'll find it very, very helpful. The second one by Kenworthy is the one which introduces the concept of comfortable intelligibility, which we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. And the third one, yes, this is pretty much the Bible when it comes to pronunciation teaching, Sound Foundations by Underhill. If you haven't checked it out, please do. You'll find lots of useful information regarding different phonological features. There are some awareness raising activities as well, and some other practice activities that we can do with our students. So I couldn't recommend it enough either. Okay. So, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this has been useful. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at troika.br. You have my email, so if you want to ask me any questions which I may have missed, please do. I can also send you the slides by email. And I hope to see you again or hear from you again in the future. Thank you so much, everybody. Be safe and take care. Bye bye, everybody.